All right. So we are now live. We are now live. Um, so my name is Jasmine. Welcome to our LGBTQIAXYZ Alphabet Gang Mafia Pride Panel live stream, coming at you live and in full color here to take over the world with our gay agenda. So yeah, my pronouns are she, her, witchy content creator, whatever. You can check my links down below. I'm really excited to introduce all of my lovely guests. Um, who decided to be a part of this project with me. So we'll just kind of like we'll go down the line and you can introduce yourself, plug anything you want to plug, and yeah, we'll go from there.
Hello, I'm Estrella Obscura. My pronouns are she, her. I am also Jasmine's co-host for Daughters of Cain. I am a practicing witch, and I don't really have anything to plug because I don't really have a social media presence yet.
Hey guys, my name's Chris. The Blood, Sweat, and Steel YouTube channel, practicing witch, polytheist, pagan, occultist, blacksmith. My pronouns are he, him.
Hi, I'm Abby the Witch here on YouTube. I go by she, he, or they. And yeah, that's me.
Hey y'all, I'm Elijah, and you can find me here on YouTube. You can find me on Instagram and at my website, alabamamagic.com. And my pronouns are he, him. And I'm really excited to be here because this is a nice break from the schoolwork that I've been doing lately, which is with a lot of Christians. So.
Hi, I'm Angela Satanica, also known as Sanctuary Satanica. You can follow me on YouTube at Sanctuary Satanica or Instagram at the same name. I make content mainly about Left Hand Path, the occult, my traditional witchcrafts, chaos magic, and of course Satanism. And my pronouns are she, her.
Hey guys, I am Chris Ashburn, clearly as it states. My pronouns are Z, she, they, he. It doesn't really matter. I prefer Z. And I am an ancestral priestess. I've been a content creator on YouTube for, I don't even know, it's around 9 years. And it's all a blur. And and I do healing work, mentorships, readings, mediumship, things like that. So, yeah.
Well, I'm so excited to have you all here and thank you all for coming on. And also too, like, there might be more people that come on while this stream is live as well. And so if they come into like the back studio room, I'm just going to bring them in. We had a couple of people who weren't able to make it today due to like family drama and like things going on. Like it's wild. It's crazy. Where I live right now, it's like super cozy and stormy. And I just want to like kind of like lay down with like a cute little snack and just eat my bread and be all fat and sassy. But here we are for showing up for the gays for Pride Month. So my first question in talking about this stream, we're really looking at all of this from like a pagan or like a witch sort of like perspective. I think it'd be really cool to kind of highlight some things in our community and like our perspectives as queers. And so, but my first question though is like, did you go to Pride? How do you feel about Pride? I did not go to Pride yesterday. I had like some work that I was doing, and then I ended up falling into a project. And then I realized at like 7:00, like, oh yeah, when I checked my Facebook, I was like, oh yeah, people like are like at Pride. Oops. So yeah, I did not go to Pride, but did you go to Pride? Yes or no? How do you feel about Pride? Let's start there.
I didn't either. I did, however, spend the day with a bunch of really good close friends and just had a good kiki time. And I love Pride. I think Pride's great. I just don't like being social and being around people and out in the sun, you know? That's my ministry.
How about you?
I did not get to go to Pride. I haven't managed to get to one yet. I do want to, though. But my my work has always prevented me from doing so. For my current job, I was a truck driver. You can forget making any kind of plans as a trucker. So one of these days I'll get there.
Sorry, my mic was off. I don't think Pride has yet happened where I am. Either that or I slept through it, but I doubt I did. It's usually very loud. How do I feel about Pride? I mean, as a leftist, like I'm super annoyed with the capitalization of Pride and how things are commodified and our struggle is commodified. I think Pride should remain a protest. I do enjoy it. It's one of my favorite sins. I think we need it.
I agree a lot with what Angela said, and I did go to Pride. Our Pride here in Florence, Alabama, was yesterday, and it concluded our week of celebration, and it's our third annual ever. And this year was by far the largest we've ever had. There were over 100 people, which doesn't sound like a lot, I know, if you live in a big city, but this is, rural Alabama. So it was really big. And there were actually drag queens there for the very first time that were from our town. Like, it was mind-blowing. It was bigger than it had ever been, and it was really exciting. And I do support Pride. I love Pride.
I did not go to Pride either. I wanted to go, but kind of like what others are saying, it's just so crowded downtown Indianapolis. Jasmine, as you know, Pride gets crazy down there. Just wasn't feeling it this year. I'm also like 7 months pregnant, so it's just didn't sound cool to me to be around all those people in the hot sun. So yeah, but it was still, it's still awesome to see like things on Instagram, like the parade, and yeah, it was cool to see that.
So Pride has not happened here where I am, and I'm in the middle of moving, as you can see in the background. So I won't be here for it. And it just caused me to look at the state that I'm moving to. And they're happening all during this week while I'm packing. So that's fun. Great timing. But either way, I enjoy seeing things, but I am of the ew peopling variety. So I don't tend to get out into mass crowds unless it's maybe a concert. In terms of Pride, though, overall, I agree with a lot of what Angela said. I don't like the commercialism that happens around it. I feel like a lot of times we miss the fucking point. And yeah, I mean, but I think it's important to have it. I think it's important to talk about it. I think it's important to have shows like this, showcasing people who deal with it on the daily.
Yeah, I agree. Also with like the commercialism of Pride. I remember, so like I'm also an indie witch as well. And I remember in probably like 2012, 2013, 2014, our Pride was really more about supporting like local queer owned businesses and really like meeting the community. And it was definitely more like, it felt like a picnic in the park, but like gay, right? And we've always had like drag and performance art at our Pride. However, nowadays, I feel like our indie Pride is much more commercial. Like, there's not as many queer-owned businesses because they've quite literally been like priced out of the market. To get like a 4x6 table at our Indianapolis Pride, it's going to run you about $800 something, and that's for a 4x6 table. That's not even a 10x10 vendor space. That's for basically being an info booth. So a lot of small businesses just straight up cannot afford to be there. And so what's ended up happening is we have basically big corporations that just show up like and slap rainbows on things and rainbow wash things, if you will, which like it's still fun, but it's definitely more of like this weird block party, because our Pride also goes on for a whole week and then the parade is like the end of it. It definitely feels more like a big drunken Mardi Gras sort of fest.
Yeah.
It's kind of more similar to, I feel like, the Pride of like Chicago in that way. I feel like we've gotten pretty far away from like our New York Pride roots. And I really like Satanica. what you said too about pride being a protest, because it is. And like, let's remember that pride was a protest. And in a lot of ways, I think it still needs to be a protest. I mean, there's a lot of things going on in the world right now, human rights being threatened. So yeah, I just wanted to know that though on a personal level. So my next question, and now we're kind of talk a little bit more in relation to like paganism, your, you know, personal religious beliefs, your cosmology, your, you know, personal practice. I'd like to start first with gender before we move on to like sex. So I definitely remember the late 90s, early 2000s era of like Scott Cunningham sort of Wiccan texts and books. And one of the things that always stuck out to me was like how so many things were like gendered, like ritual tools were associated with a gender, herbs were associated with a gender. Pretty much you name it, like any correspondence you can think of was listed as either masculine or feminine. And through my sort of process and evolution of a practicing witch, I mean, my practice has changed a lot. I'm sure that is said for all of us here, but I'm just curious, like how gender manifests in your practice, if at all. It's okay if it doesn't, but I'm just curious, like, what role does gender play in your religious beliefs as far as like your orthodoxy, but also like in your witchcraft, like in your orthopraxy? So if we could just start with that question with you, Estradia, we'll just kind of move on down the list.
Sure. Gender has always been a weird thing in my practice. I started practicing in earnest when I was probably around the age of 16. And I remember getting some weird pushback because I have always been very attuned to the divine feminine. It's just been an aspect of my practice that has always been that way. And I remember when I was, you know, a fresh wee witchling and I was being taught like Wicca 101 and stuff like that, I remember a lady straight up telling me that there was no way I could ever access the divine feminine because I was born, you know, biologically male. And I sure proved her wrong. But the one of the things I remember before I'd come to the understanding of my transness, and you know, I was still presenting as you know, a gay male, was I felt very alienated in that I didn't feel like there was a place for me in the craft because I was someone who I thought was male at the time, but I had this intense divine feminine energy within me. I didn't know where my connection was to the craft, so I didn't make my own connection. And eventually that's evolved into what my practice is today, which is still an ever-evolving thing. It still has a heavy emphasis on the divine feminine. I am a practicing devoted priestess of Hecate. I am working on my own personal tradition that I'm creating that I have kind of alluded to on Daughters of Cain, but I'm working on this tradition called the Dumpster Fire Hags, which focuses a lot on chaos and transformation. And yeah, so gender plays a role in my world, especially considering my own gender is kind of a strange wibbly wobbly thing, because as me and Jasmine have talked about, my gender expression is I recognize myself as trans feminine, as a trans woman, but I do not recognize myself in the sense of a binary woman. I recognize myself in like this unnameable category that I haven't found a word for yet, where I'm like woman adjacent, but still feminine. But yeah, there's a lot of divine feminine. I love the concept of like this overarching mother aspect that emanates into the other divine feminine aspects. That's kind of how it affects in a very vague description, that's how it affects my practice.
All right, so as a cis male who didn't come into paganism until roughly 2015, 2016, I don't remember the 90s from paganism, but I read the same books. There seems to be a lot of the same books being circulated now as there was back then. And of course, the the one that was my doorway into paganism was Scott Cunningham's Wicca for the Solitary Practitioner, like quite a lot of people. Since then, I've noticed a distinct lack of, men on YouTube. So it's been a little weird. Like my only real experience with gender in paganism has been the kind of heteronormative introduction that I got from Scott Cunningham, and then learning later, meeting new people, being introduced to new ideas, and coming to realize that actually, yeah, things are that's a little weird that we do that, or that was done. So in an effort to kind of change that narrative, I've tried to listen to a lot more different voices. So
Hi. So I had a similar introduction to witchcraft and gender where I was exposed to a lot of older Wiccan material that for me at the time felt different and more progressive because I was so used to just patriarchal religions only focusing on the masculine, or gendering things as masculine, gendering divinity as masculine. So for me, it was like, oh, like here's something with balance. But over time, it just sort of didn't suit me. And even just before I was really educated on the full spectrum of gender, I feel like gendering my tools as like male and female never quite like stuck to me. I never quite like stuck to the hard like left side feminine, right side masculine thing. And now, as a Satanist, I kind of subscribe to this deific mask construct, where I don't feel like gender, just like any other feature of the divine, is really solid. I feel it's just something that is a mask for the divine to communicate something about us to us, and how to communicate to that divine energy. And of course, like I find the image of the Baphomet sacred because I feel like it blends things that were previously considered opposites together. And that alchemy is something that I appreciate as someone who's sort of like still identifies as a woman, but similarly to like Australia, like I want to define my femininity away from the binary. Like I still functionally am a cis woman, but I feel like my gender presentation isn't always conforming to that. So I have been rethinking the role of gender for quite a few years in my practice.
I'll try to say this in like a really concise way because I have so many thoughts about this question. But the same year that I found like the occult, magic, paganism, whatever, was the same year that I also realized that I was not straight. So they happened at the same time in 2002. And they both influenced each other because I was so young. I was 13. So my journey with magic and with gender are so inseparable to me in my mind. And it's only been in the past few years that I've realized that I've always been very comfortable with being very feminine because I was a very like girly, quote unquote, child. It was harder for me to embrace masculinity. And I have seen, looking back now at journals and stuff from that time period, that magic and my working with different spirits and entities has been me really becoming more comfortable with the body that I am in and with any masculine, quote unquote, traits that I see within myself. So yeah, it's great that you brought up that question because it is something that I've been thinking about a lot for a long time now.
Can you repeat the question one more time, Jasmine? Just so I know, make sure my answer is relevant.
So basically, how does gender play a role in your orthodoxy and orthopraxy, in your religious beliefs, but also like in your personal practice? Where does gender show up and how is it significant, if at all?
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Yeah, really interesting answers. And I would say similar to what a lot of y'all were saying that, I started out with the whole like very old, outdated Wiccan ideas of male, female, and also associating masculine and feminine with the genders. And a lot of people do associate masculine and feminine with the genders, the binary genders. Me personally, as a gender fluid flex person, I don't associate masculinity and femininity with my gender identity, like my genders that I associate with. I look at masculine and feminine as energies, and my genders, I go back and forth between male and female. Those are the two genders that I go back and forth between. I would say that in my practice, gender doesn't play a huge role, honestly, but I will say that my spiritual practice and my witchcraft has made me really understand my gender identity much more. And it's definitely made me realize too that my masculine, feminine aren't really attached with my gender identity. Like, even if I'm feeling more male, I still feel very feminine. So, and similar to what Australia was saying too earlier, I identify as being a woman, just not a cis woman. So I identify as a gender fluid flux woman, a gender queer woman. So, yeah.
So to answer the question a little more succinctly before I get into the longer answer, I guess is the quickest way to say it is that it shows up in a lot of my work with the liminal, death, rebirth, things in between, just playing with that a lot, honestly. I remember all the Cunningham books and things that we're talking about from when I was younger. I did have the blessing of having a mother who is also a practitioner. And the combination of that was that she always said, well, if it doesn't feel that way to you, then ask questions about it, find out why. And I also had the combination of the fact that I had sort of, example would be the medicine wheel and the colors and the directions they're assigned, which also changes through tribe. But then we also had the color quarters, right, which would be assigned with colors and elements and all of this, and the masculine, feminine as well. And I always looked at that and was like, wait a minute, if these two can coexist, then like, if in all, why not both? And so I basically was like, all right, well then I'm just going to go off of what I feel that day is that. So in terms of talking about like tools that would be more masculine, if I felt that they were more feminine by my standards, then that's what I would use them as. And maybe that would change day to day. I think, I've always been attracted to sort of playing in black and white, Lord and Lady, dark and light, like all of those things back and forth. I never really feel like I myself fit in one place. I was raised female, but I never fully felt female. That was just sort of the role I played. And I was very good at it. And I feel comfy in it a lot of times, but it's not the end of that story, right? Like, so I'm gender fluid, but I overall say non-binary because it's easier sometimes. And I feel sometimes to be all at once and yet none even. So it is hard to explain, but I would say that it's heavily a lot of the foundation of how I even think about my practice. The sort of theories around it that started when I was pretty young. You're muted.
I'm muted again. Yeah. This is literally such a drinking game. Every time I talk when I'm muted, just take a shot and you're going to be wasted within 15 minutes. Wonderful answers. I would just like to say that, like, for myself, when it comes to gender, like my personal queer experience, I think in some ways is like a little less common. I think it's becoming more common now, but I pretty much like came out, which is like such a strange thing. Like I have thoughts about like the whole broom closet bit too, but like as soon as I could talk, I was basically like expressing myself as female, and it was mostly like my family and society that was like, silly you, no you're not. And I was like, girl, what are you talking about? Like where? And there's even like a old like home video of me as like really little, basically like asking my mom, and this is like totally random, unprompted, basically asking my mom like what happened to my sister because I had saw her in the bath. We were like little tiny baby kids, okay? Let me just make that clear. This is not like a Targaryen situation. But basically, I saw my sister in the bath and I thought like something had happened to her because we're both women. We're both girls, obviously. Like that was common sense to me. It just has taken society a little bit of time, I think, to catch up. And then my mom was like, well, what do you mean? Like, and like kind of put me up on game. And I was like, well, that's not really, the math ain't really mathing. So I pretty much kind of was socialized at home as a girl for a little while. And my mom was really nervous about allowing me to transition as a child because she was worried that something horrible would happen to me because, you know, as an adult, I can look back and see, oh yeah, actually there are really horrible, problematic things that happen to queer people, specifically trans women. So I think I appreciate that a little bit more now than I did at the time. But I was also transitioning like while I was in public school. And it was wild. I was one of the first like trans students at my public school during a time where a lot of our school faculty like didn't even know the word transgender. So there were definitely like a lot of experiences that I had because of that. But as a witch and like gender in my practice, because I am a binary trans woman, and like I have also been socialized in a very binary way. Not that I necessarily think this way now, but like per my own family and our culture, like when I started socially transitioning, basically I fit into the same box as my sisters, even though they're cis and I'm trans. All of the stereotypical like toxic parenting traits that would be placed on like a cis daughter were then placed on me. And so I was very much conditioned that way. So I think when I came into the craft, I just like kind of fell in line very easily with this binary system of magic, like when I was in high school and like my very early 20s. And a lot of that is documented in a very cringeworthy way here on YouTube. If you want to go, you know, if you want to go watch that. But gender now for me and my magic, like I really identify a lot with what Satanica said in regards to really incorporating sort of like Baphomet and this alchemizing of energy. I have really always, in my like religious beliefs and like my personal practice, been like a fairly, I would say, soft polytheist. But while I recognize like the divine masculine, it's just still really not a part of my personal practice. Not that I don't believe it exists and acknowledge the validity of it. It's just not part of my personal practice. The divine masculine really didn't come into the picture until I started working with the devil in my practice. And the devil really, in my personal practice, is also not he, him, is also not masculine. And I also work with the devil more as a familiar spirit than I do like a deity. I feel the devil is like a earth sort of land-based spirit that experiences the four seasons and is all and nothing all at once. So yeah, but I don't really still feel like I have like a divine masculine presence whatsoever in my religious beliefs. Not that I don't believe in it, it's just not part of my practice. Like I'm on my priestess shit, and that leads me into sort of like the Dianic sort of aspect of my craft, and like how I have always kind of had a drawn to some sort of like goddess cult Dianic centered spaces. But as a trans woman, my experience in those spaces has varied. You know, there are some red tents and there are some spaces that are like absolutely not. You're a man. And there are some spaces that like they'll accept me, but they won't accept my other trans sisters. And like that's not fucking cool, you know? I don't consider myself like a Dianic Wiccan, but I'm just saying that goddess cult centered mentality is very much still with me. And yeah, anyway, let me shut up. Let's move on to the next question. And also too, like if you guys feel like you want to ramble or whatever, feel free. I normally stream for about like an hour and a half ish, but we'll just kind of go from there. If you have to dip out or if you have other things to do, that's totally fine. But this kind of goes into my next question.
Jazz, hold on. I wanted to ask something of the panel. So recently I watched a somewhat controversial YouTuber's take on the divine feminine and things like that. And she posed that you could not have a successful magical religious practice if your practice was devoid of one or the other half. So she was saying that if you don't have the divine masculine or the divine feminine in your practice, it won't work. Thoughts?
Well, we can do that question next.
I would like to know how these folks are defining masculine and feminine in this regard. Because in the East, the feminine is active and the masculine is passive. Versus in the West, we have the reverse. So which is truly divine, what gender? It's just sort of a waste of time.
Yeah, and I mean, I completely disagreed with her hypothesis, but this was completely based off of Western esotericism. And she's very much also the kind of person of the mind that unless you're practicing like Western ceremonial esotericism, you're not really doing drag. You know what I'm saying? Like, she's that sort. But I was just curious what people thought about that because it kind of rubbed me the wrong way, you know?
I mean, I think that for myself on this particular topic, like we've kind of talked about this before privately, but in my practice, that's not a thing. Like, I don't feel, I mean, it's been a thing in the terms of like other practitioners have definitely tried to put that on me, especially of like the sort of more Wiccan persuasion that like I need a patron god. Right. That's never really been my reality. I don't really feel like I'm missing out on anything. My practice is very fulfilling. I do think that like there are people that hold those beliefs. And I think that the belief that like if you're a masculine person, you need to work with a feminine energy, or if you're a feminine person, you need to work with the masculine energy, or that you need both. Like I think there are traditions and systems that require that, but you don't have to be part of those systems. And if you're not within those systems, I don't necessarily think that those rules need to apply to you because you're not part of that system. That's kind of like my opinion. So like,
I agree.
Does anyone else want to take this before we jump into the next one? Does anyone else have thoughts? We can pass this around if you guys want.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have thoughts. Yeah.
Okay, let's take it, Chris.
So, if you want to be in a religion that lets you tell people what to do and what you can or cannot believe, maybe this person should have stayed a Christian. I think it's nobody's business to tell anybody else how you're supposed to practice, especially in paganism. This kind of all of paganism is all about finding your own path, at least in my experience, in my opinion. So, like maybe that's kind of a hot take, but I think it's kind of silly to tell people who they can or cannot incorporate into their, or who in terms of deities can or cannot they can or cannot work with, or must work with, or must not work with. Also, to me, half that relationship is up to the deity in question. So if you're working with a particular deity, they have also decided that yes, this is something that they want too. So it's almost, from my experience and in my opinion, you can say yes or no, but so can the deity in question. So if you end up with all or no masculine deities, sometimes that's just how the cookie crumbles.
Work.
Yeah.
Do you have anything that you would like to add, Angela? It's okay if you don't, too.
Ask me in later.
Okay.
I'm good.
How about Elijah?
Oh man, look, everyone is entitled to an opinion, and I will always back up that as a as a thing, as a value, right? Everyone should be able to speak their minds and say what they want to say, even if it goes against the majority or what have you. However, I think that people need to remember that your opinion is just an opinion. Your opinion is not a fundamental truth of the universe. What you believe doesn't apply to all of us. Yeah, it's asinine. That whole thing it's so asinine. There's no room for dictatorship in paganism, in my belief. So
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Would you like to add anything?
I really agree with Blood, Sweat, and Steel. Yeah, it's not only up to you, it's also up to the deity. And yeah, it's just the way that like things fall in place. If you're working with all masculine or all feminine, like why can't that work out for someone? Yeah, I agree.
Any thoughts, Chris?
Oh, I got thoughts always,
Let's get the thought.
Yeah, I got thoughts. So thoughts. First one is, who are you to speak of other people's purpose or place? Like, if they're not in your teachings directly under you, perhaps, like they've chosen to study under you, because that would be a different situation where, that's like an established thing between you two. You don't know my practice. You don't know my purpose, or several purposes even, perhaps. You don't know what I need. So, and you certainly don't know what my ancestors need or any of that. So, I think, while I appreciate that might work for them, I think that is a statement made out of their own perception and their own experience with themselves. And it overlooks the individuality of everyone else.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Agreed.
But this person also kind of has some not favorable views of witchcraft. I very much view this person in the House of the Magicians, which I have said before that there is a definitive difference between how a magician practices and how a witch practices.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we draw upon magic is a very different thing. And I'm also not in the camp of this is how magic is and it is set in stone. Like, I don't ascribe to that house. The whole Dumpster Fire Hag project I'm working on is about achieving magic through the unconventional, because that's how I've always done magic. And showing that you don't have to like hardcore work from a traditional standpoint in order to be a successful witch or magical practitioner. So I was just curious about how people would feel about that. And yeah.
I've just talked about that to death, and I don't need to dominate the whole panel. I've been screaming about it every day.
I think it's just kind of silly. I mean, I think I agree with the rest of the panel in the sense that, like, who are you to tell other people what they do and don't need? But also kind of, I'm with Elijah here and also Chris, in the way that, like, I do think that there are traditions that do require that. And while I want no part of that tradition, and that's not necessarily my practice, like, if your tradition says that's what you need, and if that feels fulfilling to you, then pop off, queen. Like, but
right, like,
I think the issue comes in when you try to.
It's the conversion vibe for me.
Right.
I'm just not.
Yeah.
I think
There's definitely been like debates between like traditional Wiccans and like other more eclectic witches. No, gender isn't this, gender is not, it's, gender is a social construct. And the Wiccans the more traditional Wiccans will be like, but you need masculine and feminine, coming from a fertility magic perspective. And I just think it's such a waste of time. Like, kind of like what Jasmine was saying, like, if that's your tradition, that's your tradition. Like,
yeah, I was speaking strictly from a solitary's point of view. I've never been in a coven, and if I were, then that would be a different situation. But
yeah, I mean, that's why I specified, like, if you are mentoring someone or something like that, that'd be different, because you've agreed like to the oaths and such to do that. Like, you've agreed to this hierarchy and what we're going to do and these initiations, and like, you've agreed to those terms.
Yeah,
that's different.
Yeah, and you do make a good point, Chris, and I think I can flip a little bit on that, but I mean,
Thank you,
from the
fellow
perspective-
Chris.
all the best
Oh yeah,
people
we do
named
have
Chris in there.
two. We do
Chris
have
number
two.
one and Chris number two.
Yeah, I think too, there's something to be said about like, there was a point in time where I was looking into going through an ordination process through a particular satanic chapter that I will not name. And like, I was having a conversation with like a local bishop, right? And we were talking about tenets and things like that and whatever. And I was like, so this one, cool, 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 cool. But like, what about this one? And they were like, well, it's like so and like that. And I was like, but what about this and like that? And they were like, well, that's not the tenet. So I kind of do think that like when it comes to religious ideology, like you don't necessarily have to agree with what other people think, but like if you're going to claim to be a part of XYZ and this over here is inherently part of that practice and you're not practicing it, then you're not really XYZ, in my opinion. So I'm going to get back into these questions so we can go through this panel part. So the next one is about sex and like sexuality. So for myself, like I've always felt very secure and confident in my personal like gender and my gender expression, but my sexuality has been something that has kind of been fluid and has changed over the years. Like nowadays, I very much kind of identify as like pan ace. Like I don't know. I feel like I go through heat periods where like I'm not interested in anyone of any gender or sex whatsoever. Like I'm just completely hard ace. But then like once a season, I go through a heat period where I feel very like pan and like everybody and anybody, you know what I mean? Consensually, of course, living, of course. But yeah, so how does your sexuality and the expression of your sexuality affect your magic? And if like sex magic in any way is a part of your personal practice, I would like to hear your queer perspective on that. So we're going to start with Estradia.
I don't really have a lot of sacred sexual practice in what I do. Sexuality speaking, I identify myself as pan androsexual. I'm attracted to masculinity. Unfortunately, in this day and age, I'm attracted to masculinity. And it doesn't really matter whether that person is male or female. And how I read masculinity in each individual is different because masculine, like most things in life and the occult, nothing is one size fits all. Everything is bespoke and different for every single person. So it doesn't, my sexuality doesn't really play a huge role in my craft at all. Because most of my mysteries, while they are liminal and there are aspects of like life and death and things like that, I don't know. For me, it's just never been a big part of my practice. So, yeah.
Okay, so I am heteromantic asexual. Straight ace is the short of it. But I'm the micro label that kind of applies to me is ace spike. What that means is that on extremely rare occasions, I will spike into heterosexual, but it's extremely brief and it disappears just as quickly. And it's very rare. In fact, 41 years, I've only experienced it 3, maybe 4 times. So it's extremely rare, and it doesn't last long. But for as far as how it affects my magic, or my craft, or what I do, for the most part, it doesn't. But there does seem to be a natural affinity towards notice me not type of magic, which I've figured this out while I was a truck driver. I've had to park in some shady spaces and places, and it seemed to be fairly effective, and I never really had any training with that. It just kind of sort of seems to come naturally. I'm not 100% convinced that they're connected, but I think that they probably could be. As far as sex magic goes, there's just no interest in that. I've spoken fairly to. I've spoken about asexuality to a bit of an extent this month, so I'm not going to bore anybody with the details. But basically, I don't think it really affects or connects to my craft beyond, maybe a natural affinity towards, a certain type of work.
So, oh wow, where do I begin? As a queer person, definitely my sexuality has influenced the way I experience sex magic. I utilize sex magic a lot, but when I say that, I think people have a certain idea of what that means. I resonate with the perspective of sex as a point on the Iron Pentacle from the Anderson fairy tradition. Whereas sex is like a force within this world. Sex is an experience more so than a specific set of acts, although it can be. And I have used direct sex acts in my practice, of course, but I feel like sexuality has been something I experienced mostly with my matron. She has taught me a lot about sexuality as a fluid force that doesn't have to be explicitly interacting with sexual organs or sexual body parts, although it can include that. Utilizing that has been really dynamic in my practice. It's had different meanings at different times, had different purposes. And as a former sex worker, it was something that I utilized quite a bit in my daily life. So it was an energy that really helped me move my intentions around, helped me sense energy, helped me relate to other people, and relate to myself. So it was a very beautiful experience. I still utilize it quite a bit, but maybe not as much as when I was actively dancing. So
I'm just gonna go ahead and say that I am probably the slut of this panel.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
I'm at least a retired slut, thank you.
I'm a former sex worker, and yay sex work, by the way.
Yeah.
But
Yay, sex work.
I work with entities that would probably be described as incubus and succubus, and sexuality is an integral part of my identity, how I present myself, how I receive from other people. I don't know what else to say about that other than that it is so interwoven into my practice. It's everywhere. It is. I don't want to say it's everything to me because sex is not everything, but it's a lot.
Yeah, I would say that sex and my sexual orientation probably plays less of a role in my practice than my gender identity does. However, other side, there's your cat hair. I would say that, yeah, I mean, I definitely have practiced sex magic before. My partner is not practicing witch, so it's kind of one-sided. I've also have practiced solo sex magic as well. I would say that being a bisexual person, and bisexual meaning all genders, not just the binary. I would definitely say that it has helped me, like my craft and my spiritual practice, kind of like my gender identity. Actually, it's helped me strip away some shame. I grew up in a very Christian household. I grew up going to the Lutheran church, and I grew up having shame over that, like a lot of shame. Puberty sucked for me. I mean, it sucks for everyone, but I developed a lot of shame. It was a very dark time for me. So I definitely started stripping away that shame as I grew older and realized there were more people out there like me, right? I learned what bisexuality meant. I learned what the genderqueer meant, things like that. And I would say that my spiritual practice and my witchcraft has done even more so for me when it comes to stripping away shame.
So, I am pansexual and I am gray asexual. So, what that means for folks who don't know is I'm not what would be described as a hard ace. I'm not completely barren of having a sexual drive, basically. But I go through waves where it comes and goes. When it comes, it goes hard, pun intended. And when it's not there, it's just like flipping a switch, and it's just not. It's almost sort of alien to me when I'm in that mind state. But that doesn't mean that things like self-pleasure in terms of it just feeling good are hard to reach for me. And I do think that there is a raise of energy in that, absolutely, and an exchange of energy in other situations too. I think perhaps with myself, I'm just not always in the mindset to do that. I once described myself as being pansexual and graysexual as basically like I'm an equal opportunist, but I'm a really hard interview. So like, you know, everybody can apply, but like I have a lot of questions and you're going to have to really match the vibe here. So, yeah. So, you know, I think that in my practice comes in with the knowledge that there's energy being raised, whether that is with myself or someone else. That's another reason I think I'm so picky, right? Because when I'm in the mood to do that, let's do this. But I do think that sex magic has its place in things like manifestation, and whether that is, you know, working with power exchange and things too, because that's another thing. I think Angela was the one that touched on the fact that like some things that we think of as not sexual can still be quite sexual in the energy of it. And things like power exchange and stuff like that, not involving sex, but could still be very passionate, controlled, focused. That kind of energy would still come into play. So, yeah, I think that a lot of that has to do with practice. A lot of that comes into play with how I look at magic and how I look at energy exchange and energy investment. Like, what am I going to invest in somebody? Do I have it to invest in somebody right now as well? And perhaps that's also part of the more ace moments. But yeah, I equal opportunist, really hard interview.
Which I love, by the way. Like, I love that. I really agree a lot with what you all said. When it comes to like the adult entertainment, you know, thing, that's been sort of like a love and hate relationship for me pretty much like most of my adult life. It's given me a lot of opportunity, but it's also been a huge source of like mental illness sort of struggles and like dysphoria and dysmorphia. So I have like a love-hate relationship for myself personally with that. But I'm definitely pro sex work. One thing I just want to add, like as a trans woman, like historically, my ability to like blend in as much as possible has been directly linked to my survival. Like most trans women have a life expectancy of maybe 30, maybe less if we're women of color. And my ability to like uphold the binary, be it toxic or not, and uphold femininity, be it toxic or not, in my experience has literally been like the difference between putting myself in a dangerous situation or not. And so, yeah, like there's a lot of sex magic and like related things that I could touch on, but I just feel like that's one perspective I just want to add to this panel is that like for myself, using my sexuality and using like my femininity and like even my pansexuality of like blending with like different genders and sexes has been a way for me to like quite literally survive. And I think that that's the reality of a lot of trans women. And I feel like we feel this pressure sometimes that like cis women, that's not necessarily as much part of their experience. I mean, of course, there's toxic beauty standards for women, period. But like, I feel like the reality for a lot of trans women is like, if you are not serving X level of femininity, you are putting your life in danger. Versus a lot of cis women, if you're not serving X level of femininity, maybe there's opinions that people might hold about you, but it's not directly correlated to like your safety. So that's how sex magic and like energy vampirism has played a part for me. But
something I want to add to the trans narrative thing also is that, and I was reluctant to talk about this before just because it is a sensitive subject, but as someone who constantly presents as very hyper feminine, and I don't necessarily think that I like hardcore pass all the time. I don't think I'm that stealth. I have been, unfortunately, I am the survivor of multiple very violent sexual assaults. And I think part of that comes down to the fact that because I am trans, because I am hyper feminine, and I represent this level of femininity that I think a lot of toxically masculine people are attracted to, it puts a target on my back. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm willing to give up that level of femininity, because this is just who I am.
Right.
I'm not going to hide. And trust me, I'm a fighter. I'm going to fight these people. But it is an aspect of my existence that I think maybe has skewed the aspect of sexuality for me, because sexuality, or not sexuality so much, but sex has been leveled at me as a weapon on so many occasions that I think maybe that has a part to play in why it's not a big part of my practice. Not because I'm worried that like there's some corruption there or that there's further damage that I'll sustain. I think realistically, I'm just kind of numb to a certain level of sexual energy. And so for me, my focus is on other areas of the craft. And I think that's why, for me personally, sex and sexuality doesn't play a huge role in my craft. I just wanted to clarify that. You're muted, babes.
Oh no!
Everybody drink.
Take a shot. Okay, so that kind of ties into my next question, which is like, as a queer witch of experience, how do you feel, and what challenges do you feel that you have kind of had to navigate and like overcome and work through? Being that it is Pride Month, a huge part of Pride is taking pride in ourselves regardless of the resistance that is against us, and having our existence even just be a protest. So when we're talking about pride and we're talking about the struggles that we have been through as queer people, how does that relate to your paganism or your witchcraft or your orthodoxy, orthopraxy? How do you feel that you have faced challenges as a practitioner and a queer person, specifically within more magical spaces?
Well, Jasmine, I know you and I have had some very similar issues within the pagan community in our city, where as trans women, we've not always been welcome with open arms. I can also say that for me, as a queer person, as a trans woman and a witch, and because of the way that I present myself, I have gone into certain occult spaces where I wasn't taken seriously. People, I guess, in certain spaces take a look at me and they're like, huh, she's dressed like some kind of weird rainbow doll. She can't possibly have any knowledge of the occult. Whereas I'm over here actively an occult scholar and a folkloric scholar. And I could probably philosophize some of these people under the table, but that's neither here nor there. The truth is that because of the very binary stigma that exists within a lot of occult spaces, when you have someone who exists outside of that binary, when you have someone who challenges that, sometimes occultists get a little heated and they're like, you have no place here in our circle, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, that's why I've actively made it a point to carve out my own space. Because if they don't want to share, that's fine. I don't need to share with you. I can make my own. And it's going to be fierce, you know? So.
Literally pop off. We stand. Okay, Chris.
Yeah, can I just get a little clarification on what the question was again, please? I'm sorry.
So the question basically is like, how do you feel this Pride Month you are overcoming oppression, struggles, obstacles, thriving in the face of adversity in your queerness? And what challenges have you faced as a queer person in the magical space?
Okay. Yeah. So I sort of feel a little cheap in that because I'm straight ace, I don't clock as queer. So I don't have a target on my back. So I've been trying to just, basically shut up and listen to everybody else. Um, I almost feel like I don't know, there's almost a sense of like, everybody else has bigger problems than me. So my struggle has been trying to figure out what I can do to, make that kind of a less of a shitty situation for other folks. Like, I'm not in any kind of physical danger when I go outside and walk down the street. Whereas, a cis woman of color, yeah, they probably are, in more situations than I'm even aware of. So I'm trying to, my challenge is to make myself shut up and listen so that I can be more aware of what other people are going through. And that's, I hate to admit it, but humans being human, that's sometimes difficult to do. So I don't know. I don't really, like I said, I don't have the target on my back, so I don't really know. I almost don't feel like I feel bad because I don't have a whole lot to contribute to the conversation on this particular question because I don't clock, or at least I don't think I do.
But that's still an important role to fulfill and to be aware of. Like, I definitely appreciate that like, hear someone say that, acknowledge that they're not going to go through the same struggles as other people, and I resonate with that as well. Definitely, I feel like even though I'm bisexual, like I'm not clocked for it that often. A lot of people pick up that there's something queer about me. They just often can't place it. For me, I feel like my struggles are less like a direct reflection of my identities and more like when I am facing like overall prejudice that could affect way more people than me, and I am trying to find ways to prevent it from happening to someone less privileged than me. I'm currently in a struggle like that I cannot talk that much about. I've been through it before, and it's sad to me how a lot of people in the witch community, and this is, I don't know if it's really for me a struggle of just queer people and cishet people. I feel like it's also a struggle politically of like liberal performative virtue signaling versus truly understanding and being an ally.
Yeah.
That's something I keep like encountering in my personal witchcraft community.
Yeah, the hardest thing for me lately has been, well, not lately, just overall period, has been like, okay, I'm not in danger. How do I be an ally? And what's the most effective and efficient way for me to be an ally without I don't know, crossing any kind of lines that don't need to be crossed, because that's actually not helpful.
Well, something that I will throw in there, Chris, is that being willing to listen and learn and not speak over is a really huge tool. Like, it's a really big deal because there's so many people outside of, or maybe who don't fall into the like obviously queer spectrum, who make it, who can really help make safe spaces for people who do have that target on their back. So what you are doing, taking that time to listen, to understand, to create that safe space, that's a big deal, in my opinion.
So I used to lead a coven that was, this is many years ago, that was not exclusively, but very heavily Norse in its tradition. And when we would try to, we would travel out of state to Tennessee to this pagan fest. And when we would try to, meet with other people, other groups, there was so much like gatekeeping and just attitude from people once they learned that I was the head of the coven, because I was the only queer person in this coven, by the way. So it's like they would immediately see the group and be like, oh yeah, lots of straight white people. That's awesome.
You're converting them all.
But then I would step forward and be like, yeah, I'm, the priest of the group. Hi, hello, how are you? And just my voice alone, people are like, you're not straight. And and that experience was awful. And ultimately, I think is one of the contributing factors to that coven breaking up, was that did sow this seed among some of the people in the group that why are we letting a gay person like tell us what to do, quote unquote. So there's been that experience in this magical community, and yes, especially with Nordic paths, for some reason that attracts a lot of skinheads and neo-Nazis and things like that. But also I'm in the South, so they're kind of everywhere. But then more recently, I find it crazy that, we're in this magical community, which is alternative to the popular community. So you always assume that people who are in a marginalized group are going to be more open-minded with each other. But that's not always true, because people are people, no matter where they go and what label they fit in. And lately I found that people in the past that have been totally cool with me practicing witchcraft and paganism and the like as a gay man, they're like, that's cool, yeah, woo, gay guys. But I am someone who has always identified with the bisexual as a label, but have been predominantly in male-male relationships. And once they find out, like, oh wait, you have had sexual relations with women, and it's like suddenly the gay community in the magical community feels betrayed by me somehow. Like I've betrayed them by having relations with someone of the opposite sex. It's wild.
And I think it's, as a bisexual person, I think it's harder on men that way. Like I think it's just so much more accepted for women to be attracted to more than one gender than men. And I don't know why that is. It's just
I'm so sorry. I didn't even interrupt you, Angela. If I did, I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
I would say, as also a bisexual woman, not a cis woman, but as a bisexual woman, I would say that it's almost like, yeah, men definitely get more shit for it, for sure. But on the contrary, I feel like my bisexuality has been fetishized and sexualized obnoxiously so.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And that is so, and it is
double
so
if you're poly, like
yeah, or like even not like, well, I remember like, I mean, I'm not on dating apps now because I'm married, but years ago when I was on a dating app and I put bisexual, like I don't know how many times I got, can we have a threesome? Can we have a threesome? Can we have, like, I don't exist for you, like my sexuality doesn't exist for you. And they just like, and a lot of like cis dudes like just like assume that I'm gonna do that for them, like I'm gonna fulfill this fantasy for them, and that can get really fucking annoying. That can get really like, you feel it's like
icky. It's icky. It
is.
Icky. Because like I identify with that because I have been in the past on various dating things too, and like I will put in very obvious captions like, do not fetishize my transness. And then people will be like, they'll send me really explicit messages fetishizing my transness. And it's like, can you not read?
Yes.
Yeah.
Did you have anything else, Elijah? I don't want you to get interrupted.
Yeah. Oh, it's fine. Just to add like a nuance to that conversation, I think as someone who has back in the day put on their like dating profiles, that they are bisexual, but also like trans-amorous. I've gotten so many messages from cisgendered men, usually heterosexual cisgendered men, who are like, hey, if you can get a trans person to have relations with you, can I come and be a part of it? Like, it opens up a whole nother thing, when people find out, oh, so you really are just open to everything. Like, let me get a piece of that. Like, it's just disturbing.
Well, it becomes not looking at the person as a person. It becomes looking at the person as a person to script in a play in their head.
Yeah, it's
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Estradia said.
Like, this isn't porn on demand, baby. First of all, pay if that's the
Right.
case. And this is not that
For
real.
Not for sale, bitch.
Good freaking grief! Like,
Yeah. Or like
Did you
how
have
some
anything
people are
else?
saying.
Did you have anything else that you wanted to add to the question, Abby?
Well, and I was gonna say too, like what some people are saying in the chat too, like that's the assumption that all bi men are actually just gay, or aren't all women bi?
Ugh,
Like I hate that shit.
I hate.
I hate that shit.
how willing would they be? Would that man be to do that in the reverse though? Like, would he be willing to, like, if his girlfriend wanted to do that with another man and him? How willing would that person be? You have to wonder that there's some hypocrisy there.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
I'd be willing to bet no straight guy that I know would be okay with that. And there's a hypocrisy to that I don't.
Well, what I find strange too is like there's this huge fetishization. That's hard to say. Fetishization of trans women, and
Yes.
the reverse
Yeah.
is not always there. Like, I've had really rewarding experiences with trans men, and they're just completely omitted from the equation completely. And that's not right. But do I want them added to the equation if they are going to be put into the same situation that trans women are? I don't know. But that's me trying to, I guess, be like a protective ally to them. I don't know.
Yeah, and Abby, I'm sorry if that was a confusing way of trying to make that point. I didn't mean to sound weird.
No, it's okay. You're fine.
I'm gonna jump here to Chris.
Okay.
Chris, would you like to touch on this topic at all?
This one or the question? We got both going on.
The question.
Sorry.
Yeah, I would say my biggest struggle has been the presumptions from my presentation. I express fairly femme. I have been in a hetero marriage, and you wouldn't know I was gray ace unless I told you. So, like a lot of things in my life, and I just made a post about this recently, but like a lot of things in my life, like being indigenous, being pagan, etc., like a lot of things you can't tell about me until I tell you, which means that there's a lot of room for assumption there, and people already love to assume anyway. So I like to look at myself, and this is kind of to comment on some of what Chris was talking about like, because of that, not knowing what to say. And I like to look at myself as a sleeper agent. I like to get into all the places that people feel so fucking comfortable being themselves so loudly and ignorantly. And I like to just listen to them. And then I like to drop some facts about shit that I am that they couldn't tell. And I like to have that conversation because now we're already talking about it. We're already in it.
No going back.
I also like to you mentioned about the benefit of listening, right? We were talking about that a bit. And I also like to, when I am listening to someone go off about something that they don't know about, and I am not someone, for instance, I'm not trans. So if I'm listening to someone go off about someone who is trans or trans people in general, and I am not that myself, so on some level I can't speak on that. The benefit of this is when you are a good listener and you listen thoroughly, you can credit and repeat. You can credit the person or the group or the site or wherever you got that from, and you can repeat it. And if they have issues, you can direct them to Google, right? So there is an element of, even though you yourself are not that, you can go into places that other people can't. You are in places where they don't expect it, and their guard is down. And that's a little asshole of me, but I don't care.
Because I do the same thing too. I tend to shut up and listen and let them make the dumb assumptions about me that they're making, and
Mhm.
I will listen to them when they don't have the filter on because they don't know to.
Yeah.
And if it's something that I find to be problematic in a way that is potentially harmful to somebody that I know is in our community,
Yeah.
that person's going to know who not to trust.
Yes.
And I think that that's like Chris kind of took the words out of my mouth, Ashburn Chris, in response to Chris, Blood Chris, because when you talk about like, I feel like, you know, other people have struggles deeper than mine or boop, 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 whatever. I think the benefit of being kind of able to blend in is that you can be an ally to your fellow queer siblings by occupying spaces that we do not. And if, you know, for example, I work at a men's barbershop that plays ESPN constantly. And there are plenty of instances where ESPN will be talking about trans women's bodies because trans women in sports. And I have clients sitting there being serviced by me, telling me their very strong opinions on trans women in sports. And it puts me in an interesting position of like, okay, how do I handle this situation in a way that serves my community? And I'm sure, Blood, there's plenty of ways where maybe you're around certain people, whether it's like being around family or being around friend groups where maybe your queerness isn't necessarily front and center, and people say certain things that they maybe wouldn't say in front of other people that are more visibly queer, whatever that exactly means. You can be in a place then where you can kind of like check or correct, you know, your uncle, your brother, your homie, whatever, and be like, actually, that's not cool. Like, which leads us into our next question. So we've been talking about our sexuality and our gender and like our overall queerness. What sort of like advice or messages would you have for people who identify as allies? She's an ally to our community. Specifically kind of that overlap between like neo-paganism, paganism, left-hand path, witchcraft, and queerness. How can people be better allies who are not in our community within these magical spaces?
You know, I feel like I kind of already touched on this, but that taking the time to like listen to your queer counterparts, listen, understand the things that they're dealing with, that they're struggling with, and having an understanding of what advocacy looks like, that it's not speaking over, it's amplification, it's boosting up. And I mean, really, I feel like we've kind of, any point that I would make has already been touched on, but you know, I definitely think it comes down to listening and understanding and having compassion. I agree, Kitty.
I also agree, Kitty. No, Chris, you're muted.
Take a shot.
Yeah. I feel like I'm kind of in the boat of the ally here because, again, like I've already said, I don't have the target on my back. So my advice is to listen, and I don't know. I guess like be a safe place where you know the people in the community that you care about can vent, knowing that it's not going to get back to anybody. I mean, like, you know, I try to basically just be someone that I would want to talk to. I don't really know. I mean, because I don't have the same experiences as everybody else here. So I guess more to, you know, Chris's point, maybe I need to take her advice. You know, remember that I don't clock, so I'm kind of in
Sleeper
stealth
agent.
So, yeah,
Join the ranks.
Yes.
Okay, so for now, my message to the allies. I think definitely I agree with the sitting back, listening, decentering yourself when it comes to queer issues. And that even goes for other queer folks, for example, when it's not about us as cis people when we're discussing trans issues. That I also wanted to add for allies that if you come to Pride, if you come to queer spaces and you are choosing to learn through immersion and make, queer friends, understand that you're a guest in those spaces, that it's not about you, just like how when you listen, you are there to be receptive to the culture around you, to the tone that's set around you. We have set up spaces to be safe for a reason. So please respect that and help us maintain that as an ally. That and when researching our history, do not just settle for what is given to you on the surface. There is so much transgender and bisexual history that has been buried, even asexual history and pansexual history that has been buried and suppressed that we can have access to now that is very important to this entire movement.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, yeah, I would say, as an ally, being an ally in any community asks of you something pretty big, which is to really remove yourself out of the way and to just listen, like to put your ego aside, because it's not about you. You're in service of the community. So yes, listen and use your voice to educate and in defense of the community. That's great, but I would just say always have this little checkup with yourself mentally where you ask yourself, why am I doing this? Why do I feel the need to be an ally to this community? Why do I feel the need to be a vocal ally for this community? And is what I'm saying and doing in correspondence with what I believe about this community? Because there are a lot of people who claim the title of ally who aren't really allies. They're just in it because they think it's either the right thing to do or because it gets them more attention. So I would just say, check your reasons for being an ally. And when you do use your voice, do so with education behind it and with confidence behind it.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I'll just be a broken record here and say that, it's important to listen as an ally, but it's also important to use your voice and not be afraid to, call someone out. I think for me personally, that can be like even harder than listening sometimes, like just like growing a pair of ovaries and just being like, yo, dude, that's not cool. Like that's really bigoted of you to say that or whatever. And I think that is really important too. Obviously, don't put yourself in danger, but I would say too, similar to what Angela was saying, that even as a queer person within the queer community, I also identify as an ally, obviously. But what I mean by that is that as someone who's perceived, especially when I'm feeling more female, I'm perceived by the world around me as a cis female. It's just assumed. And so I feel like just as a woman, I have a little bit of a bigger target on my back than a cis male would, but I have a way smaller target than someone who's not white or someone who's trans. So I feel like because of those things, it's really important for me or someone else like me within the queer community to listen and speak for those who might not be listened to or be able to speak as much. So yeah.
I mean, so a lot of what everybody has said, it's pretty on point with what I was going to say, but also like the title of ally is earned through actions, through how you speak up, through how you show up. but also through how you educate yourself, not through other people who are going through it under the umbrella, but you yourself, to all of these plentiful places that you could find things, instead of sort of asking them to just tell your life, asking them to tell you their life story and just bare their soul to you. That's exhausting. Some people don't have the rocks to do that. They don't have the spoons to sit there and educate you. So as an ally, educate yourself. Don't expect that. Also, I would say it's important to remember that ally in the etymology, at least in the verb sense, is to tie or to bind. You are a connecting point as an ally. You are someone who can go in the middle, just how I was talking about those sleeper agents. And that is a lot of responsibility. It's also a lot of shadow work, a lot of self-work. And it also is important not to be a selective ally. If you're going to be an ally and you're going to stand up for people who are, other or outside or, whatever, under that umbrella, don't pick and choose which alphabet you want to follow. Like, if you are an ally, you're an ally, and you understand the concept of that.
Yes.
Period.
Yeah, very well said, as always, Ashburn. Like, I love having Ashburn on these panels because I just feel like you come prepared with the thoughts. You know what I mean? I appreciate it. I think my closing thought on this particular topic, and don't speak over me when I'm talking about my tranny queer business. If I'm talking about how, our civil liberties are at risk in various states, don't talk over me and don't speak for me. But when I'm not in the room, if you consider yourself an ally and I'm not in that room and people are discussing whether or not my existence should be legal in this country, if you're an ally, you should be speaking up then. You should be uplifting my voice when I'm in the room. But if I'm not in the room, then yeah. So the next question, before we get into Q&A or any other comments anyone wants to make on this stream before we end, because we're at about an hour and a half, I'm just curious. So for you individually, as a queer, practicing witch, pagan, whatever terminology we want to call it, how are you personally supporting your queer occult community yourself? We'll just take this round table. What are you doing in your world and your practice to support the queer witchy community?
I feel like this is kind of a difficult thing to answer because I would like to say that I'm, doing all the things. There's definitely more that I could do. A lot of it comes down to my devotional practice and the protection and the workings towards the protection of people within the queer community. And making sure, and Chris touched on this, Chris Ashburn touched on this a little bit about not everyone has the spoons to educate. I frequently do have the spoons to educate. I'm real quick to educate a person. Jasmine, you know that I'm real quick to read someone that writes. And I will take the time to thoroughly educate a person, especially if there's someone who's being super ignorant in the moment. I know they're probably not going to learn from anything that I have to say, but they're going to listen to what I have to say. And then there are a lot of young people in the queer community that need education themselves because they don't always have the vernacular to describe who they are, who they could be. They don't always know what spaces are safe. And being a person that can offer that safe space, or that can offer a little bit of guidance to younger queer people, I think is very important. And also making a safe space for queer witches, trans witches, is also really important because as a trans person, as a trans witch, we don't have a lot of spaces that are dedicated to us. And I think having the ability to make that space is really important. And that's definitely something that I know Jasmine has been working towards very diligently, and it's something I'm working towards as well. You muted, babe.
I know. So beyond just being quiet and listening when the other letters are talking, I don't know if trolling bigoted coworkers counts, but in fact checking them, but also make
Absolutely.
like for Pride Month, making videos talking specifically about my letter in the Alphabet Mafia, so that people who are struggling to figure out themselves that might happen to fall into that category can find something from somebody else and know that they're not alone. I think that does help. And basically listening and making safe space for everyone else in here, because again, it goes back to me not having a target on my back. So how do I support other people, and trying to learn how to be an ally myself, because I do feel like it's important to be allies to our other letters, to our fellow members in this community. And that's about as far as I've gotten so far, and I'm still learning how to do better.
Okay, so first I want to say that every single person on this panel is doing amazing by existing. Your existence is resistance in this time, in this place. That being said, as an ally, I could always be doing more. My goal with my project of Sanctuary Satanica is to yassify the shit out of Satanism, so much so that fascists want nothing to do with it anymore. I want it to be accessible to queer people, trans people, people of color, anyone who has been outcasted, because that is the purpose of Satan's path, is to find your own way when you do not fit into the world that is laid out before you. In my personal magical practice, I am, I help various transgender clients. I don't speak too much on it because, whenever we're going up against legislation and things like that, we best just let the spell work and not get into detail. But yes, I definitely think everyone could always be doing more. So I'm always looking for new ways and trying to learn about new things to be a better service to my fellow queer folk.
There are many, many days out of the week that I sometimes feel like I'm the only visible out witchy person in the half of the state I live in. So everything that I present when I am in public, I try to purposefully lately make it very witchy. Whether that be like I'm wearing something that like a witchy shirt. My car has witchy bumper stickers, and like I have business cards that look very witchy that lead to my very witchy website, and I leave them on every bulletin I can in every grocery store and every community center I pass by. I'm just try constantly to make my presence known so that they know they're not alone here with their Christian town. Like, I'm here too. And certainly there must be other people in this town that are like me, that just are existing in stealth mode because they don't see anyone else like them. So without sounding like I have some kind of messiah complex, I try to be very visibly queer and visibly witchy whenever I'm outside of this house. Because I think that alone makes a big statement in a very small southern town.
I'm sorry, I'm distracted with things going on in the chat right now. I would say, going off of that, actually, though, some people in the chat are reminding me of one way that I definitely support the queer community, and that is when I get nasty, or even just like witches in general. When I get nasty comments, when I get judgmental comments, when I get bigoted comments, I try really hard. This is just my personal take on it. This is just how I handle it. I have learned and decided that I am not going to engage, because that could be the type of person that could harm someone who's more in danger than me. And I could be the one to trigger them. So for me personally, I feel like that's a way of keeping my fellow queers and my fellow queer witches in particular safe. Of course, like a lot of you were saying, I could always do more. I always do try to listen and spread the word and educate people as best as I can. But yeah.
Jasmine, can you repeat the question specifically for me, please?
So basically the question is, like, what are you doing in your personal practice to benefit the overlap between the queer and witchy community?
Gotcha. Okay. Well, for one, existing. Existing. Also, recently, the non-binary and gray asexual stuff has been things that I'm talking about. Previously, I've mentioned in passing that I was pansexual, but I've never really touched on the rest. And so I think bringing that into an audience that maybe some are around and some are not, and maybe aren't privy to those terms or anything like that. I mean, I happened to tell my mom about gray asexuality and explain it to her, and she was just like, "Oh, is that what that is?" Like, so I think it fell off the tree. But basically, I think that's one of the main things. I think the second thing is in my business, I make it an effort to make a safe space. So my server is a safe space for that. My clients, in any kind of mentorship and stuff, I deal with folks who are all along the rainbow, and people who are polyamorous and etc. Alternative lifestyles, like all of that is a place that I'm very accepting of. And I think that there's a lot of places that that's seldom found within a practice, and looking specifically for like witchy mentors. And I think that's a lot of it at the moment, is just being very honest about my thoughts on things and who I am and how I am and how I've always been. And also showing up that way in my services and how I show up in the community, and talking about it. Exposure.
Yeah, I think that existence is a resistance, and I love how that was put. I know that for myself, like doing things like this, even just like creating conversation, I think is something that can help benefit our community. And also, like, as someone who leads like public rituals, a lot of what we do is also fundraising to help support like our local sort of like queer fundraisers. So things like the Damien Center, Indiana Youth Group, and, you know, even if just taking a love donation, right? Like someone shows up to a public ritual, bring your offerings, bring whatever, but also maybe bring like $5 with you and throw it into like the love bin. And then we take that money and we go donate it. Or like at the shop, we've done like charity drives and charity shirts where we'll make shirts and then take all of those proceeds, not 70%, not 20%, not 90%, but 100% of those proceeds on those candles or those shirts, and then go donate it to charitable causes. I think it really starts at like a grassroots level of like even just working in your own community. So yeah, and yeah, of course, existence is resistance, absolutely. Do any of you have like any closing thoughts about this sort of panel and like our gender expression and our sexuality in terms of being queer witches? I mean, how do we even feel about like the term queer, for example? I think that sometimes is like a hot button topic. Or if any of you have anything that you want to add or questions, like this is kind of the time. And if anyone in chat has any questions, feel free to leave those down below.
I love the word queer.
same.
I think that I think the word queer has been used to oppress people in the LGBT community. And I love that we're taking that word back and giving it our own power.
Yeah, queer is people often try and use the word queer as an insult, but they used to use pagan and witch as an insult too. We've got those back. We can definitely take queer back.
I like queer a lot because it also, to me, like when I think of queer, I think of anything LGBT behavior related.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's also just easier for me to like introduce myself as like a queer person than sit here and specifically be like, as a pan-ace trans woman
Yeah.
identifying as a fucking
Yeah.
threat. You know what I mean? Like, it's just easier to be like, as a queer person. Like,
Right. Exactly.
And I
That
also
too.
feel like queer is a political stance as well. I'm not a white
Yes.
picket fence gay. I'm a brick throwing queer.
yeah.
Like, you know, like I'm not here to allow your little straight pride thing. No.
No.
You know.
I love the term. I am for it. I think that it is also a nice, comfy place for people who really don't have words to describe who they are or are always in flux. And I think that's important too, is to have a word that they can go to. But I like the reclamation of the word. I like the riot in the word, you know?
Yeah.
I like the fact that, like, to me, the word queer is like slightly outside of the norm. It's something strange and unusual and blah blah blah. And so it also almost lends itself to like bending things and just tweaking them and melding them and molding. And I, the magical practitioner in me enjoys that too.
The only gripe I have with the words, you get the same problem with queer as you do with religious. You know, if you say that I'm religious, they will immediately assume you mean one thing. If I say I'm queer, they will immediately assume.
Yeah. Yep.
gay.
The thing is,
That's
though,
right.
is like when you rattle off the entire kind of thing. We could get really technical, and I'm sure everybody would have like a, here's all of my terms, including my expression and my identity and sexuality and etc. Romantic
How
status.
big of a
blah,
name
blah,
tag.
blah. Right. And a lot of people, you'd lose them somewhere in there. But
Which
if
I
you just go,
I think that's kind of fun. I mean, I
no,
think
it's
that when
totally
people are
fun
like,
sometimes.
yeah, when people are like, oh, how big of a name tag do you need? And
Yeah.
woo and blah, blah, blah. Like, babe, it's the queer agenda. Like, we're taking all of the letters of the alphabet, ma'am.
Yeah.
Like, we're going to be taking the entire alphabet eventually if you just.
Agendas assembled. Yeah.
Yeah. But I do like that sometimes you can just go, yeah, I'm queer. And then like,
Yeah.
I like that the word queer includes
No.
gender as well as sexuality.
Yes.
It's not,
Yes.
even though cishet people may interpret it however they interpret it, we know what it means. It's a very inclusive
I have a question. For the
umbrella.
panel. I have a question for the panel. Is poly queer? Do we think? I'd say.
As the,
I don't know.
I'm going to say no. I'm going to stand and say no.
As a poly person, I'm going to say no. I think it's definitely an alternate. I think it's somewhere between like the otherness of queerness and the otherness of having a kink. It's somewhere like it's just a different structure, and we like poly people are oppressed for it, but in different ways. And being, a heterosexual presenting poly person is very different than
Okay.
because
I don't know if I am or not, and I don't think it's actually all that important. But it's interesting.
I think being ace is queer. I think that's pretty queer.
Yeah, I think being ace is queer, definitely.
Yeah.
I think the A also like agender, asexual. Yeah. Like polyamory to me, like monogamy, polyamory, honey, misandry. No, I'm kidding. These are not sexualities to me. Like
well, they're alternative
identity.
lifestyles.
Right.
Yeah.
They would be an
misandry is my
alternative lifestyle. Yeah.
That's fair.
Otherkin, Jasmine?
So,
oh God, don't get me started on the other 10.
Yeah, Jasmine, Faye Fair.
Do you want me to talk about that on this panel? Are we going to talk about that on this panel?
Are we going there?
We can go
I
there.
have known someone with Faye Fair pronouns that I felt it fit her. She also uses she, her. I felt fit fair to use them. I'm probably not conjugating them right at all, but I think they're cool, you know.
So I want to specifically, when we're talking about Fae Fair, I want to specifically highlight a particular facet of this neopronoun. Let me also say this too, before like people try to edit this video or whatever and make it sound like I'm saying something I'm not. The issue is not with non-binary people. Like, I'm not that toxic femme doll who's like, the they thems can't be here. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
I think it gets into a very weird place when we dehumanize the queer experience. And there are people that identify as Fae Fair that are saying, like, not only am I queer, but I'm not human. And for myself as a queer person, as a trans woman who has been habitually fetishized and dehumanized, and we've had to fight just to even be treated as a human being who deserves legal rights and medical attention and healthcare, I think when we step into the territory of including non-human XYZ into the alphabet gang, I think it can get into like a weird area. The issue is not with Z's or they, them, whatever. The issue is like blending that in, because that also to me feels more otherkin, which is valid. Totally valid.
Right.
I mean, I identify as like a man-eating vampire, but that has nothing to do with my gender or my sexuality per se.
Right.
I think
Like,
that's also like,
or your queerness, right?
yeah.
Right. So to
And
me,
it's
that's
also
like
generational of like, I think I'm just thinking as a sociologist, because of course I am, but like generational, like I think younger kids are trying to dissociate from society a little bit.
And I don't blame them.
And they conflate
Yeah.
these new identities they're uncovering about themselves with dissociation, such as I'm not human, I'm not part of this.
And
Like-
I don't blame them for that
Yeah.
whatsoever. I will tell you from my trans experience, like, not that I am in any way trying to uphold trans medicalism, but like, in order for me to get some of the treatment that I have received covered, I have had to go through various like medical hoops, right? Please go to a gender specialist and tell them that you identify as a non-human fairy, and then spit in my face and tell me that this experience is a joke to you. Like, that's what it sounds like to me. If we're saying that you're a fairy.
Yeah, and I feel like too, you have pointed out the conversation you and I have had, Jasmine, too, where it's like, what kind of like threats have you gotten for identifying as Fae?
Right, because it's not about like,
You know,
it's not about being non-binary. It's like,
not to like,
Yeah, and
Yeah.
if you want to share your experience, but don't compare it to someone else's when you don't share that experience. you
well, like
know?
I had made a Facebook post about this, and someone was like I was genuinely asking from people who identify as Fae Fair, like, what struggle are you proud of overcoming this
Right.
Pride Month as someone who's Fae Fair? And like, if your struggle is people disrespect your pronouns, we're being unalived, like, actually. So like, not that this
Yeah.
is the struggle Olympics, but like, it just seems weird to me.
So
It
here's
seems
where I'm
weird.
coming from with it. As someone who falls into a category of feminine adjacent, the whole reason that I initially gravitated towards Fae Fair was because it was a word that felt like it fit my idea of something feminine but not binary. So that's why I initially gravitated. It had nothing to do with me feeling like a fairy or, you know, anything like that. It had to do with finding vernacular that fit my identity.
that makes
It was
sense.
my identity, my gender, a word that I could lend power to that expressed my femininity as a
Mhm.
non-binary woman.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the purpose of pronouns to begin with, right? So I mean, that's all there should be is, and people should respect everyone's pronouns, of course. Thank you for sharing.
So real quick, my Mercury is going into full burning mode. This person in the comments section, Chemo, I'm going to answer your question for you since you are so tenacious. No, nothing about this panel is geared towards children or grooming or pedophilia. This has nothing to do with the dark arts, and if you were educated, you would understand that this is not Harry fucking Potter. Dark art, the
Yeah, no
concept
shit.
of black magic
don't
and
even
white
like
magic
her.
and dark and light is all rooted in racism.
Yep.
What this is geared toward is not indoctrinating the LGBTQ and the adult into the dark arts or anything like that. What this is we are LGBTQ people on this panel who are also occultists, and we are talking about our experience as occultists in correlation to us also being members of the LGBTQ. I hope that answers your question. Kindly shut the fuck up with your ignorance in the comments section.
Yeah, per. I want to say about the otherkin thing, like the whole otherkin thing has roots in the UPG of I was once like XYZ, blah, blah, blah in a previous life. That experience has affected me in this life. Like also too, not only do I not have an issue with people that are non-binary, babe, if you're otherkin, invite me to the party. Like I'm so down. Like I also don't have an issue with otherkin people. I just want to like make both of those things clear. The Fae Fair topic is specifically through the lens of dehumanization of queer people. Specifically, it's not like the entirety of that. It's just we're talking about queer experiences. That's my experience. Was these people genuinely saying, for me, Fae Fair is about identifying as not human, which I kind of relate to in a way because who would want to be human in 2023? Like that's
honestly,
I'm so dated.
I'm just over here trying to be a fairy mermaid goddess, and I mean,
honestly, yeah. Anyone else have
if you knew what research was, you wouldn't be asking those questions in the first place. Kindly shut the fuck up.
Also, I apologize for getting so heated. It's just,
No, I was going to address that. I figured I
Never.
would found to fuck himself sideways with an anchor. Thank you.
Do any of you have anything else that you would like to add? Maybe like a closing thought for the stream or something? Anyone? Any thoughts?
Be gay, do crime.
We stand divine.
Eat the rich.
Be queer and hail Satan.
Happy Pride.
Yeah.
Happy Pride, gay.
Happy
Pride.
Yeah.
Come on down to Old
Okay.
Navy. Come on down to Old Navy and pop that. You know what I mean? But no, I would like to just kind of end this stream with like, I sincerely appreciate all of you taking the time today to sit on this panel for almost 2 hours about something in our experience that can often feel like very vulnerable. And like, it's unfortunate that our existence is controversial. So, I mean, I just appreciate you guys being willing to like collaborate on this because it's something that I really wanted to do for Pride was like speak with other queer practitioners and also hold space for those people that maybe right now it's not safe for them to come out. Because like that's the reality. There could be people watching that maybe identify as queer that feel like it's not safe for them right now. And I just would like to tell that person that if you're watching, like, I think it's safe to say that this entire panel is holding space for you. And we respect like your decision to like choose your safety over being public. Like that's valid. And yeah, I'm just happy that y'all came on this panel with me. And
Thank you, Jasmine, for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Everyone was so thoughtful. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Yeah, this was really great. I loved all of this.
Same.
Bye.